Hey guys, tonight we float down winding waterways, the sun just brushing the mist that rises off the Mekong and Red River deltas. You trudge barefoot along the muddy banks, feeling that soft, squelchy suck of wet earth between your toes, and inhale the aroma of damp reeds, wet bamboo, and faintly fermented rice husks. You probably won't survive this without at least daydreaming of a nap, but that's exactly the point. We're here to drift, not dash. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, post your location and local time. I'm curious if anyone is listening while tucked in under a monsoon drizzle or a quiet, starry night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift through the kingdoms of 18th century Vietnam, where rivers are the arteries of life and rice the heartbeat. Small sampans slip through floating villages, their wooden hulls groaning softly under baskets of glistening grains. Here, rice isn't just food. It is ritual, currency, and spirit. Families whisper prayers to the rice mother before sowing, because in these deltas, the act of planting is a delicate negotiation with forces both seen and unseen. You feel the weight of centuries pressing gently into the present, the history of each paddy layered in mud and water. Historians still argue whether rice spirits were symbolic metaphors for community cohesion or literal supernatural guardians. But as you watch a farmer scatter golden kernels under the morning mist, the distinction seems irrelevant. Each grain carries a story. You notice the variety of stalks. The slender, pale stalks of upland rice contrast sharply with the fat, resilient stems of delta-grown glutinous strains. The kitchen is alive with rhythm. Pots clatter, water bubbles, and the smell of roasting fish mingles with the gentle steam rising from bamboo steamers. You crouch by a fire, noticing the particular way rice is soaked, sometimes overnight in cool river water, other times quickly rinsed to retain a subtle stickiness. There's a logic here honed over generations, a tactile understanding of how temperature, texture, and timing affect the end product. You watch as the women taste, pinch, and adjust, their attention to detail bordering on obsession, and you can't help but smile at their delicate authority over these grains. Historians still debate whether culinary preferences or agricultural conditions drove this complex selection of strains, but the connection between taste, place, and memory is undeniable. You drift toward a small courtyard where several varieties are laid out on mats to dry in the sun. The pale, glutinous rice glimmers like frost under the morning sun, while darker, aromatic strains fold into themselves, promising a nutty flavor when steamed. Children poke at the piles with sticks, giggling as grains scatter across the mat. Yet even their play is a form of transmission, teaching them to recognize textures, colors, and scents. Some varieties, so delicate, require constant monitoring. Others, robust and enduring, are treasured for their reliability during erratic monsoons. The village's food identity rests upon these distinctions, small, quiet, but immensely powerful. You notice a peculiar tradition. After drying, certain grains are wrapped in banana leaves and set aside for ceremonial meals, weddings, or ancestral offerings. The leaves impart a subtle fragrance, and the act itself honors the invisible lineage of the rice, the families who preserved it, and the fields that bore it. Historians still argue whether these microterrain variations in the delta were consciously exploited to preserve rare varieties or simply resulted from practical adaptation to local water flow and soil composition. Quirky as it seems, some farmers insist that a handful of seeds planted in a particularly shaded corner will develop a more fragrant aroma when cooked, almost as if the land whispers instructions to the grain. You crouch down, brushing your fingers across the waterlogged soil, and can feel the subtle undulations, tiny channels dug by ancestors, guiding water and supporting the intricate dance of survival. A family crouches along the paddy edge, carefully transplanting seedlings into shallow water. The father murmurs softly as he presses each cluster into the mud, while his children imitate him, counting stalks and adjusting spacing. The rhythmic action is almost meditative. You sense the pulse of history in every motion. Quirky traditions abound. Some varieties are given a pinch of crushed flower petals before planting, believed to enhance aroma and vitality, while others are told to grow strong through whispered encouragement. Historians still debate whether such practices had measurable effects or were symbolic acts reinforcing respect for the crop, but they clearly transmit knowledge, rhythm, and care across generations. Along the irrigation channels, you notice tiny bamboo markers poking above the water, denoting rare or heirloom varieties. These markers act as both memory aids and subtle warnings. These grains are not ordinary, and mismanagement could result in their disappearance. You realize that maintaining this delicate mosaic requires both science and superstition, intuition and observation. Quirky as it seems, some farmers even keep secret micro-reserves of their rarest seeds in small bamboo tubes hidden among reeds, ensuring their preservation through flood, famine, and the curiosity of outsiders. One elder hums softly, tapping the water with a bamboo pole, and you catch the faint melody, a lullaby for seedlings, or maybe a warning to the mischievous spirits hiding in the reeds. In some villages, ceremonial trays of miniature rice sheaves sit beside incense sticks. The peasants insist that neglecting these offerings might anger the rice ancestors, who could summon floods or droughts. It seems quirky to you, modern and slightly theatrical, but the water reflects their devotion, shimmering like liquid gold under the rising sun. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen story from last week? Practicality and belief weaving together. But here, the ritual is as nourishing as the rice itself. The architecture of floating houses, tilting gently on stilts, mirrors the fragile balance of cultivation. Bamboo scaffolding stretches into the river, supporting nets for catching fish that complement the diet. You step carefully on a rickety plank, the water lapping softly, the scent of wet straw in your nose. Local children wade ankle-deep, their laughter mingling with the quiet squawk of distant waterfowl. You realize each paddy is a microcosm of society. Family labor, spiritual devotion, and ecological mastery wrapped in tender shoots of green. Rice is tribute as well as sustenance. Kingdoms rely on the yield for tax, trade, and feasts. A rare amber grain might be set aside for the mandarins in the court, the kind of rice whose name is whispered reverently because it is said to shimmer in candlelight. You lean closer to a floating basket, intrigued by the glistening kernels, and wonder how many of these grains are centuries old in lineage, passed down through careful selection. Historians still argue whether the elite's obsession with exotic rice actually improved yields, or simply created scarcity that peasant families had to navigate cleverly, often secretly hoarding their own heirloom seeds. As you drift, the river itself becomes a storyteller. Quirky as it seems, one elder chuckles while showing you a bundle marked with tiny knots of string, claiming it ensures the rice remembers its home, even when cooked far from the paddies. Historians still argue whether such practices had practical effects on preservation or were purely symbolic gestures. But the stories imbue the grains with a quiet life beyond mere nutrition. As you wander further, the tactile intimacy of food preparation becomes apparent. Hands, water, fire, and grain intermingle in a dance that shapes the very identity of the village. Women pound rice into flour, mix it with coconut milk or honey, and shape it into cakes for communal meals, each process designed to highlight the unique qualities of the variety in question. The subtle differences in stickiness, aroma, and sweetness are celebrated, discussed, and memorized. You marvel at how a single village, isolated and small, can harbor such extraordinary diversity, a living library of flavor, texture, and memory. Each preparation, each meal is a rehearsal of history. Beyond taste, rice here is culture, narrative, and storytelling. Songs are sung while husking, advice whispered to children, and jokes cracked about the stubborn grains that resist pounding. You notice one particularly robust strain that always splits unevenly during preparation. The women laugh at it, teasing it as if it were a playful child. Yet the grain persists, revered despite its quirks. Quirky practices abound. Some sprinkle crushed flower petals for aroma. Others toss a pinch of river silt into the soaking water to honor ancestors. Historians still debate whether these embellishments were functional, spiritual, or simply poetic flourishes, but they underscore the intimate relationship between people and their rice. By mid-afternoon, The village is alive with communal meals. Steaming rice fills bamboo baskets, while the aroma spreads like a gentle invitation along the paths. You marvel at the ingenuity, seeing both practicality and poetry intertwined in these acts of quiet vigilance. Nearby, an elder crouches beside a patch of particularly long-grain rice, gently separating seeds damaged by water or pests. You notice his hands move almost automatically, decades of experience guiding each selection. He mutters soft instructions to the young assistant at his side, pointing out subtle differences in color, panicle length, and stem strength. It is both a lesson and a ritual. Care, attention, and tactile knowledge are being transmitted alongside cultural memory. Historians still argue whether the tactile and observational methods of seed selection were formalized knowledge or informal tradition, but the outcome is a remarkable diversity of resilient and flavorful varieties. You drift to a section of paddy flooded slightly deeper than usual, the water reflecting the soft afternoon sky. Here, resilient strains survive where others might fail, bending with currents without breaking. Farmers have learned over generations which grains can withstand variable conditions, which need drier banks, and which should be reserved for special occasions. Quirky as it seems, some claim that grains exposed to slightly turbulent water develop a subtle sweetness or aroma, an observation that blends empirical practice with poetic storytelling. You feel the weight of this knowledge. Survival, taste, ritual, and culture all encoded in the selection, placement, and handling of rice. As the sun dips lower, the landscape shimmers with golden reflections. You pause to watch a small child carefully place handfuls of rice into a water-filled furrow, counting each cluster, learning lessons in patience, observation, and reverence. You notice that even playful mistakes are instructive. Grains scattered accidentally are retrieved, examined, and sometimes planted differently, preserving diversity through small, attentive acts. You see silt spiraling in eddies, carrying nutrients and history downstream. Fishermen, paddling with skillful sweeps of their oars, glance at you with mild curiosity, as if recognizing another pilgrim of sorts. You note the interplay of light and water, how the stalks bend rhythmically with the current, whispering faintly, "Plant us well, or we will remind you." It is not a threat but a promise. Later, a small shrine on a riverbank catches your eye, adorned with rice sheaves and carved figurines of long-forgotten deities. A village elder murmurs a chant in the early morning haze. You can almost feel the lineage of these grains, each kernel a repository of generations, of floods survived, of sun-drenched harvests, and of prayers that once filled entire households. The air smells faintly of incense and earth, and you realize that your own pulse has slowed, sinking to the rhythm of these watery realms. You float past a stretch of reeds where rice sprouts are just peeking above water, their tips glistening like green candles. Historians still debate whether the early 18th century Vietnamese actually cultivated as many varieties as some texts claim, or whether chroniclers simply romanticized the diversity. Either way, your eyes are convinced. The river is alive with grains, their subtle differences detectable only to the practiced eye, yet their combined presence shaping culture, economy, and daily life in a way that modern spreadsheets could never capture. You pause to watch a family tending their paddy. The father dips a conical hat low, shading his eyes, while the mother carefully sifts a handful of grains, selecting the plumpest for planting. A small child clutches a bamboo pole, pretending to fish, giggling when a passing water snake slips silently beneath the surface. It is charming, slightly chaotic, and profoundly human. You sit, sampling the diverse textures, and are struck by the realization that each grain carries its own story. Survival against floods, journeys across rivers and mountains, secret preservation by families, and ceremonial elevation. What you see here is not just food. It is a living archive of identity, flavor, and memory. And as the sun casts long shadows across the courtyard, you feel the rhythm of generations in the soft, sticky clumps of rice. The heartbeat of a culture, preserved in grain, aroma, and practice. You follow a narrow river bend where French trading junks bob gently against bamboo piers, sails taut in the warm delta breeze. Merchants, dressed in linen that's already sweating in the humid air, scrawl notes onto thick, rough parchment as they inspect curious bundles of rice. You trudge closer, and the scent of imported spices mingles with the earthy aroma of fresh paddies, creating an intoxicating blend of worlds colliding. These Europeans are fascinated by every kernel, cataloging colors, lengths, and textures with a seriousness that seems both meticulous and mildly absurd. You probably wouldn't survive their exacting curiosity if you tried to explain that rice isn't merely a commodity. It's memory, lineage, and spirit, but you can't help smiling at their enthusiasm. Historians still debate whether early French merchants truly understood the nuances of Vietnamese rice varieties or merely fetishized novelty. Yet their journals reveal an astonishing attention to detail. You notice a particular collector holding up a handful of long-grain rice, rotating it in the sun like a gem, muttering measurements and descriptors that sound almost like poetry. Quirky as it seems, some European observers tried to categorize rice according to smell, taste, and even the sound it made when cooked, imagining that these grains held secrets of flavor waiting to be unlocked. Historians still debate whether such informal education had measurable impacts on variety preservation or yield, but it is clear that continuity rests on hands, eyes, and memory, passed gently from elder to youth. By evening, the paddies hum with insects, frogs, and soft wind, the water rippling gently against carefully constructed ridges. You feel the rhythm of centuries in this quiet corner, the convergence of care, observation, ritual, and adaptation. Every stalk, every seed, every patch of soil is part of an intricate network of survival, taste, and cultural memory. Quirky, meticulous, and profoundly human, the Delta's rice varieties embody resilience and identity, thriving in the careful attention of farmers who honor both their land and the legacy of generations past. You breathe deeply, feeling the pulse of history in the soft murmur of water and stalks around you, understanding that these grains carry not just life, but the whisper of countless stories, waiting to be remembered and passed on. You trudge along a narrow embankment, the late afternoon light slanting across the paddies in warm gold, illuminating stalks that sway softly in the breeze. Here, the Delta shows its intricate patchwork. Sections of glutinous rice, aromatic varieties, and rare heirlooms, each carefully tended and meticulously separated. You notice small stakes marking the rarest clusters, often overlooked by outsiders but revered by villagers. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, mingled with faint floral notes from rice varieties prized for fragrance. You probably won't survive imagining the centuries of careful observation, selective planting, and whispered instruction that shaped these stalks. But as you watch, the delicate choreography of human and land becomes mesmerizing. Somewhere between devotion, survival, and play, you recognize the heartbeat of 18th-century Vietnamese Delta life. Rice, rivers, and rituals moving together, quietly, persistently, like breath. The sun climbs higher, casting golden patterns on the water. The riverbanks seem to hum with memory, and you drift forward, lulled by gentle oars and the rustle of stalks. One kernel of rice, you muse, holds a world, a kingdom, a family, a spirit. You feel small and significant all at once. And as the mist begins to thin, revealing distant thatched roofs and glimmering paddies, you understand why these forgotten grains, though nearly invisible in modern times, once held the power of life, law, and legacy. You trudge along a narrow mountain path, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and crushed leaves, and wonder how these tiny grains made their journey from highland slopes to the sprawling deltas below. Baskets balanced on bamboo poles sway precariously across villagers' shoulders, and you can almost hear the rhythmic tap of wooden clogs against stone, echoing through misty valleys. Seeds in these times are more than food. They are travelers, carriers of culture, and sometimes carriers of secrets. You notice the subtle differences between them. Some round, pearly white, almost timid in size, while others are long and golden, assertively leaning into the basket as if aware of their destined role in distant feasts. Historians still argue whether upland rice truly originated in the northern highlands or was gradually selected over centuries by clever farmers experimenting with cross-pollination and terrain-specific cultivation. You lean closer to a bundle of straw-wrapped seeds and feel the warmth radiating from the tightly packed grains. It's an intimacy you didn't expect to find in something so seemingly ordinary. A mule shifts under the weight of a load, jostling the basket and sending a few rogue seeds skittering into the mud. You imagine them tasting a perfectly steamed handful and jotting down elaborate charts. Slightly ridiculous, yet undeniably part of the historical record. You drift along the dock, observing villagers demonstrating how to transplant seedlings and harvest glutinous varieties. The merchants watch intently, occasionally scribbling in French, occasionally tipping a hand in confusion when a farmer demonstrates a method that defies their expectations. Some varieties, they note, grow only in certain soil types or require peculiar treatments, like being soaked in water infused with crushed herbs or ashes. You chuckle quietly. These treatments, practical yet superstitious, are just as important as the soil itself. Historians still argue whether Europeans documented practical agricultural techniques accurately or filtered them through layers of exoticism and cultural misunderstanding. A French botanist crouches over a tiny pile of seeds, meticulously separating grains by length and color, occasionally sniffing the panicle and jotting notes. You notice that some of these observers are almost in love with the rice itself, treating it as a living object of study rather than a foodstuff. Quirky as it seems, one insists that a certain short-grain rice produces songs when steamed, an exaggeration, of course. Yet it hints at the profound respect for sensory observation that informed early botanical study. You watch him carefully measure kernels, perhaps imagining himself the hero of a quiet European epic, cataloging treasures that had been ordinary in local villages for generations. Nearby, a market bustles with exchanges, a complex choreography of hands, scales, and whispers. Rare varieties, sometimes wrapped in banana leaves or straw, move discreetly between villagers and traders, often slipping past the eyes of colonial authorities. You notice one merchant sneaking a tiny packet of seeds into a larger basket, careful to maintain secrecy. Historians still argue whether these meticulous separations were primarily a strategy for survival, a display of social prestige, or a cultural practice steeped in ritual, but the outcome is undeniably a preservation of biodiversity. Quirky as it seems, some villagers insist that certain rice prefers to be planted near companion varieties, which somehow enhances growth, resilience, or aroma. You watch as a child adjusts a small cluster, learning these subtle rules intuitively, embedding centuries of practice in muscle memory and attention. The Delta is alive, a classroom, a laboratory, and a sacred space all at once. Along the embankment, a small shrine rests, decorated with offerings of rice, incense, and water. You observe an elder sprinkling grains in precise patterns, chanting softly to ensure that the spirits favor the harvest. Quirky as it seems, some families maintain secret talismans among the rice stalks, believing that ancestral presence protects the yield. Historians still debate whether such rituals were primarily functional, symbolic, or a clever way of enforcing careful management. But the reverence is clear, shaping behavior and attention in subtle yet powerful ways. Nearby, villagers tend to a strain of particularly delicate red-husked rice, reserved for festive occasions. Each stalk is handled with extreme care, roots gently pressed into the soft mud, panicles brushed free of debris. You notice that these rare varieties require repeated attention, trimming, water management, and monitoring for pests. Quirky as it seems, some elders whisper to seedlings before planting, telling them to grow strong and straight, a ritual that blends tactile care with spiritual guidance. Historians still argue whether such verbal encouragements had any tangible effect, or if they were primarily mnemonic devices to ensure focused attention, but their persistence speaks volumes about the cultural integration of belief and labor. You smile, knowing that even the journey itself is part of the grain's story, and possibly the reason some varieties survived while others vanished. By midday, the path descends into the delta, and the landscape opens to broad, water-filled paddies reflecting the sky. Boats crowd the riverbanks, and villagers ferry their precious cargo downstream, often hiding their rarest seeds under layers of straw or among sacks of everyday rice. You notice a peculiar ritual. Some farmers dip seeds in water infused with crushed turmeric or ash, claiming it strengthens their vitality. It seems eccentric, bordering on superstition, yet you watch the seeds glisten after immersion, almost as if acknowledging the care and attention bestowed upon them. Historians still debate whether these treatments actually improved germination rates or simply provided psychological reassurance to anxious planters. On board a small sampan, you see a mother carefully rocking a basket, her fingers brushing away broken hulls, as if she is coaxing the seeds to life with gentle persuasion. Around her, children balance precariously, attempting to mimic her careful gestures, while a pair of ducks schemes the water's surface, occasionally pecking at stray grains. You're struck by how this ordinary scene embodies centuries of experimentation. Farmers moving seeds between microclimates, observing which strains thrive in the cool uplands versus the flooded lowlands, and noting the subtle shifts in color, size, and resilience. Some grains are said to be wanderers, surviving even if transplanted far from their native soil, while others, delicate and fickle, stubbornly cling to their original terrain. You drift past river bends where wild rice still grows among reeds, its small panicles swaying like miniature flags in the wind. Villagers collect these forgotten grains at night, using them as emergency reserves or blending them with cultivated varieties to enhance flavor. This kind of barter reflects a sophisticated understanding of value, scarcity, and risk. Historians still debate whether these secret exchanges were primarily economic, social, or cultural acts of preservation. Yet it's clear that knowledge of rice varieties was power, passed in subtle gestures and trusted nods rather than official registers. You drift further down the quay, past warehouses where European sacks of rice are stored beside local stocks. The contrast is remarkable. Imported rice, uniform in color and size, gleams with commercial precision, while the Delta varieties are irregular, colorful, and fragrant, their differences reflecting soil, climate, and human care. Quirky as it seems, some local strains even have slight color variations depending on the moon phase during planting, a fact the Europeans notice but cannot interpret. You chuckle at their confusion. They're trying to apply Western logic to a system entwined with ritual, intuition, and ecology. Later, a French scholar kneels beside a woman demonstrating how to cook a particular glutinous variety. He measures water, counts handfuls, and murmurs calculations, while she hums and sprinkles in herbs and leaves without numbers. The contrast is stark, European rationality meeting generational instinct. You watch the steam rise, carrying both sense and subtle lessons, and realize that in this moment, science and tradition converse quietly, sometimes clashing, sometimes harmonizing. Historians still argue whether these early botanical studies genuinely advanced European knowledge of cultivation or simply fueled exotic fantasies in salons and libraries. At dusk, you watch the last merchants pack their findings onto boats bound for distant ports. The golden sunset casts long reflections across the water, illuminating both European curiosity and local ingenuity. You drift past a small irrigation channel where water shimmers, reflecting the golden light. Farmers adjust bamboo sluices, channeling water carefully to prevent flooding sensitive paddies. A child helps an elder, learning not only mechanics but observation, noting soil softness, water clarity, and subtle differences in stalk posture. Quirky as it seems, some varieties are only planted in water that has run over certain mud types, believed to enhance flavor or resilience. Historians still debate whether these water-based techniques were empirical or ritualized, but in practice, they shaped the survival and quality of the rice. You wander to a family crouched by a corner plot, transplanting seedlings from trays soaked in cool river water. The rhythmic motions, the dip, the press, the slight nudge of each stalk, carry the weight of accumulated knowledge. You notice a subtle nuance. Older hands adjust the depth of planting based on microtopography, shading, and soil firmness, ensuring each variety has optimal conditions. Quirky as it seems, some families rotate planting sequences according to lunar phases or folklore, blending empirical observation with ritual timing. Historians still argue whether these calendars genuinely improved yields or merely synchronized labor, but the combination of precision and tradition is undeniable. Later, you observe a communal drying area where harvested grains are laid on woven mats, gently turned to sun. Each variety is separated, some retaining husks, others partially processed for ceremonial use. The air carries a complex scent of straw, wet earth, and ripening rice, a sensory map of the harvest. Quirky practices persist, sprinkling aromatic herbs, marking exceptional grains with colored threads, or whispering blessings over bundles. Quirky as it seems, some farmers claim that these wild seeds carry the spirits of ancestors, whispering advice during planting season. You can't help but chuckle, though perhaps a little nervously, at the notion of your own dinner having ancestral counsel. Yet the care with which these seeds are tended reflects a profound awareness of the balance between human effort and natural resilience. Historians still argue whether the spiritual dimension of wild seed collection was primarily a practical mnemonic device or a genuinely held belief in mystical intervention. Along the riverbank, you notice a curious pattern. Seeds sorted by weight, length, and even color, laid out on woven mats to dry in the sun. The farmers move with a rhythm that blends efficiency and ritual, humming tunes that seem to instruct the seeds on where they are headed. You realize that seed transportation is a social act as much as an agricultural one. The selection, cleaning, and packing process reinforces family hierarchies, community bonds, and a subtle network of trust and reputation. Rare grains, particularly those prone to disease or flooding, are guarded jealously, sometimes hidden beneath the bark of river tamarind trees or inside hollowed bamboo. These secret practices suggest a sophisticated understanding of both botany and human psychology, an early form of biosecurity. The journey continues, and you trace the flow from upland terraces where small, clay-packed fields cling to hillsides, down to the sprawling delta where water reflects every cloud and leaf. Along the way, some farmers chant softly while sprinkling a pinch of salt or ash over the seeds, believing that these small gestures fortify the grains against disease. You note that what may seem whimsical, tiny grains passing through hands, rivers, and rituals, ultimately determines which varieties persist, which flavors dominate, and which textures vanish from memory. You follow a small family quietly transferring heirloom grains to a hidden bamboo container, ensuring that these varieties, treasured and obscure, survive beyond the attention of foreign collectors. Some grains will travel to imperial kitchens, others to ceremonial trays, and some will remain, quietly resilient, in the hands of villagers who understand their worth in ways no ledger can capture. Quirky, ritualistic, and profoundly human, the movement of these seeds across cultural boundaries is a dance of survival, fascination, and memory. By nightfall, the European boats have departed, leaving the village enveloped in the soft chorus of frogs, waterbirds, and rustling stalks. You pause on the bank, feeling the humid air cling to your skin, and reflect on the convergence of worlds. Foreign eyes cataloging, local hands preserving, rice itself carrying memory, taste, and spirit. In the glow of lanterns, you glimpse the continuity of care, curiosity, and quiet rebellion that ensures these varieties endure. Even in the presence of outside influence, the Delta, its rice, and its people persist, resilient, fragrant, and stubbornly alive. You trudge through a delta flooded by recent monsoon rains, water reaching your ankles as you navigate the soft, yielding mud. The sky is a muted silver, heavy with clouds, and the air smells of wet soil, decaying vegetation, and the faint sweetness of ripening rice. You feel the pulse of the land beneath your feet, a living matrix that challenges both human effort and fragile grains. Floods and droughts dictate the rhythm of planting, the timing of harvest, and the resilience required of each rice variety. Some strains bend with the water, almost dancing, while others seem to resist, their slender stalks trembling like nerves stretched taut. Historians still debate whether these small rituals affected preservation or were symbolic acts of reverence. But in practice, they reflect the intimate attention and care that sustain rare varieties over generations. As dusk approaches, the paddies settle into a quiet rhythm, stalks swaying, water lapping softly against dikes, and insects hum their gentle chorus. You pause, taking in the delicate interplay of labor, ritual, and ecology, feeling the continuity of centuries in every stalk. Quirky, meticulous, and deeply human, The Delta's rice varieties persist not just through seeds but through attention, storytelling, and reverence. Each grain carries memory, resilience, and a whisper of generations past, a living testament to the ingenuity and devotion that shaped the landscape and the culture it sustains. You trudge along a narrow path between paddies, the late sun warming your back and casting long reflections on the water. The delta hums softly. Insects drone, water ripples gently, and the occasional bird calls from a distant reed. You notice clusters of rare rice, each stalk subtly different in height, hue, and texture. Some shimmer pale green, others golden or even reddish-brown, and each seems to hold the memory of countless generations of careful selection. You probably won't survive imagining how many cycles of planting, flood, and harvest shaped these grains. But the thought humbles you as you kneel to touch the tender stalks, feeling their resilience beneath your fingertips. Historians still argue whether such diversity was consciously cultivated for culinary and ceremonial purposes or primarily arose from environmental adaptation. Yet the interplay between human attention and ecological context is undeniable. Quirky as it seems, some villagers claim certain varieties only flower properly if exposed to moonlight on specific nights, a poetic belief that ties agriculture to celestial rhythms. By the time the sun begins to cast long shadows across the delta, you are surrounded by an intricate network of rice travelers, each with a unique trajectory, and you marvel at the patience and ingenuity required to shepherd these grains across mountains, rivers, and generations. In one quiet village, a basket of particularly resilient upland rice is set aside, marked with a strip of cloth dyed with turmeric. The villagers whisper that this variety is older than any living memory and may have originated from seeds carried down centuries ago by traders or monks. You watch them, almost invisible in the dense morning haze, exchanging nods and subtle gestures as they load the last baskets onto a small boat. There's humor in their secrecy, like a mischievous wink at the future, but also solemnity, a recognition that these seeds carry not only sustenance but heritage. You take a deep breath, inhaling the mingling scents of earth, water, and grain, and feel a connection to an endless line of hands that have shepherded these seeds over terrain and time. And as the boat drifts into the larger river channel, you glimpse how the delicate balance of human care, natural environment, and chance has shaped the rice you see. Some varieties will thrive in floodwaters, others will falter. Yet each grain is a story, a traveler, and a memory, moving from upland terraces to delta paddies, bridging the gap between mountains and kingdoms, ritual and survival, past and present. You can almost hear the whispered conversations of seeds across generations, secrets carried downstream, waiting for the next set of hands to tend, sow, and remember. You step into the early morning haze of a delta village, where mist clings to the water like a damp veil, and you notice farmers already crouched in the paddies, consulting the sky, the wind, and most importantly, the moon. Historians still argue whether Vietnamese farmers in the 18th century intentionally selected rice for flood tolerance, or whether survival favored resilient variants naturally, a subtle experiment conducted over generations. You notice a peculiar patch of yellowish stalks standing taller than the rest. Locals whisper that this sunseeker variety thrives even when submerged longer than others. You bend down to touch a stem, feeling the subtle flex, the way it springs back from pressure, a tactile reminder of the adaptation embedded in every kernel. Quirky as it seems, some farmers claim these resilient strains can hear the water, bending only when tides and currents dictate, an almost poetic notion that blends observation, myth, and hope. The delta is a labyrinth of waterways and mud channels, each influencing which varieties prosper. You watch a farmer ferry seedlings in a small bamboo boat, delicately transplanting them into paddies still shimmering from floodwaters. Water beetles skitter across the surface, and dragonflies hover, casting fleeting shadows over the soft green shoots. You notice that certain seeds are planted only on elevated ridges, where floodwaters recede fastest, while others are left in lower areas to test their endurance. Historians still debate whether this microterrain selection was an intuitive understanding of hydrology or a product of ritualistic tradition codified over centuries. You pause at a communal irrigation channel, where water is directed with precision using bamboo sluices. The air is thick with humidity, and the scent of wet mud fills your nostrils. Farmers chat quietly, sharing tips about soil consistency, seed spacing, and flood management. Some of the techniques seem almost playful. Small clay markers indicate depth, tiny dikes guide flow, and children even participate, learning how to read the water's behavior. You watch a farmer whisper to seedlings, adjusting spacing and depth with care, blending observation, ritual, and practical know-how in a quiet dance that has persisted for centuries. You wander to a small courtyard where harvested grains are sorted. The air is thick with the scent of drying rice and the faint sweetness of crushed husks. Villagers handle the seeds with care, separating rare heirlooms from common stock. Some grains are reserved for daily meals, others for festive desserts, and a few for offerings to ancestors. Quirky as it seems, certain kernels are marked with tiny knots in straw or colored threads, a mnemonic device as well as a symbolic act, ensuring the identity of prized varieties. Historians still debate whether these markings influenced survival of particular strains or were mainly cultural gestures, but their persistence shows the subtle intelligence embedded in traditional practices. Nearby, a family demonstrates how to prepare glutinous rice for ceremonial cakes. They soak, pound, and steam with a rhythm honed over decades. You notice the tactile precision, the slight pressure applied to husks, the timing of each movement, the subtle sprinkling of water or aromatic leaves. Quirky as it seems, the pounding rhythm is sometimes accompanied by soft chants, meant to encourage the rice to absorb care and energy. Historians still argue whether these chants held practical effects or were mnemonic cues to maintain process integrity, but their integration into daily work is striking. Along the waterway, children learn by imitation, their small hands mimicking elders' gestures. They gently separate stalks, observe the subtle color variations, and note soil conditions. You watch as they place grains carefully into small bamboo containers, learning both technique and tradition. The lunar calendar governs their actions with a subtle authority. Sowing, transplanting, and harvesting all follow phases that are believed to influence growth and yield. You trudge along the muddy banks, squelching in rhythm with the squishy soil beneath your feet, and realize that these calendars are as much about culture as science, guiding generations through the erratic patterns of monsoon rains and seasonal floods. Historians still argue whether these lunar planting rituals were genuinely effective in improving yields, or simply served as mnemonic devices to synchronize communal labor. Either way, as you watch the villagers scatter seeds under the soft silver light of a waxing moon, the atmosphere feels charged, almost sacred. Some farmers pause to whisper to the seedlings, invoking blessings for abundant growth, while others tap the water rhythmically with bamboo poles, believing the vibrations encourage roots to grip and stems to straighten. You can't help but smile at the combination of precision and superstition, the way ritual and observation are tangled together like the roots of the rice itself. The monsoon rains drum lightly on your conical hat, a gentle percussion that blends with distant chants. You notice small, irregular heaps of seed that have been soaked overnight in water mixed with ash or crushed herbs, a peculiar practice locals swear strengthens the grains against disease and flood damage. Quirky as it seems, some claim the soaking allows the rice to listen to the rhythms of the water and the wind, as if each kernel is absorbing environmental cues that prepare it for life in the field. You peek closely, and the grains glisten like tiny pearls, each one holding potential, memory, and a hint of magic. The process of lunar planting involves more than timing. It's a choreography of human bodies and natural forces. Quirky as it seems, some elders whisper that water spirits favor paddies with neat ridges and measured flow, a subtle intertwining of practical engineering and belief that ensures care and attention are never neglected. Drought, too, imposes its will. You notice patches where the soil cracks under the sun, small fissures threatening young seedlings. Farmers improvise, using shallow channels to draw water from nearby streams and sprinkling ash to retain moisture. Certain varieties, known only to a few families, are planted specifically for dry spells. They mature faster, their grains denser and less likely to shrivel. Historians still argue whether these drought-tolerant varieties were the result of selective breeding, careful observation, or pure serendipity, But witnessing the careful balancing of soil, water, and seed, you sense that generations of trial, error, and instinct have shaped every choice. The interplay of flood and drought also affects cultural practices. You see villagers performing small offerings at the edge of a particularly waterlogged paddy, scattering rice grains and chanting to ensure that the waters do not destroy the crops. Quirky as it may seem, some grains are deliberately planted near shrines or under sacred trees, believed to benefit from spiritual protection. You kneel to watch, the water lapping softly around your legs, and marvel at how survival, superstition, and ecological intelligence intertwine. Historians still debate whether these rituals provided tangible benefits, such as deterring pests or guiding labor, or whether they were entirely symbolic, but the blend of practicality and belief is undeniably elegant. A few hours later, the sun pierces the cloud cover, revealing the shimmering green of the paddies stretching into the distance. You notice how certain resilient varieties stand out, their stalks straight and proud even under the weight of water. Quirky as it seems, some families whisper that the rice remembers the care given, producing better grains when handled reverently, a poetic notion blending observation and belief. Historians still debate whether such tactile education influenced long-term survival of rare varieties, but the evidence of intergenerational transmission is clear. You pause at an irrigation sluice, observing how water is guided deliberately to different plots. Farmers explain that precise water management prevents disease, optimizes growth, and supports delicate varieties. Some strains thrive only in slightly deeper water. Others need the shallows. Quirky as it seems, occasional sprinklings of ash or crushed herbs are applied, a mix of superstition and practicality thought to enhance both fertility and protection. Historians still argue whether these embellishments were functional, symbolic, or both, but the precision of practice reflects a deep understanding of environment and plant behavior. As twilight falls, the delta glows in soft orange light, the rice stalks swaying gently. Farmers pause to observe, checking each plot before nightfall. You notice the delicate balance of care, ritual, and ecological adaptation. Each action, planting, whispering, soaking, marking, or adjusting water, is layered with meaning, ensuring both survival and continuity. Quirky, meticulous, and profoundly human, these traditions have preserved a remarkable diversity of rice varieties, embedding memory, taste, and culture into the very soil. You breathe deeply, feeling the pulse of history in the gentle rustle of stalks, aware that each grain carries resilience, stories, and reverence across generations. You trudge along the edge of a misty paddy at dawn, the humid air clinging softly to your skin. Tiny droplets sparkle on the blades of rice like dew-kissed gems, and the faint chirping of birds mixes with the distant clatter of bamboo water wheels. Children carefully follow adults, learning to step lightly on the narrow ridges between flooded paddies, hands outstretched for balance. The elderly murmur protective charms while guiding the placement of seedlings, ensuring that no accidental misstep will offend the unseen guardians of the rice. You feel the rhythm, the heartbeat of centuries embedded in every movement, in every seed dropped, in every whispered prayer. Historians still debate whether these protective measures were purely symbolic or if they had a subtle, tangible effect on pest deterrence and soil health. You wander along the edge of a particularly expansive field where long, slender stalks of a rare glutinous rice sway with the breeze. Farmers use small wooden sticks to gently prod the water, checking for hidden pests and ensuring that the seedlings are firmly rooted. Some even employ tiny, handmade scarecrows, not for birds alone but to ward off spirits that, according to local belief, might interfere with growth. You laugh softly, imagining a disgruntled rice spirit being shooed away by a straw figure wearing a miniature conical hat. The mixture of practical care and charming eccentricity seems to define life in these paddies. The village elders explain that each phase of the moon corresponds to a particular agricultural task. Sowing during the waxing crescent for root development, transplanting near the full moon for vigor, and harvesting on specific days to maximize sweetness and texture. You crouch by a small trough, watching water ripple across the pale stalks, reflecting the moonlight in fractured patterns. There's a peculiar rhythm to it all, a blending of astrology, observation, and communal memory. You consider how modern agriculture relies on tools, chemical inputs, and climate modeling, while here, a moon, a chant, and a careful eye achieve astonishing results. Farmers move among them, assessing health, reinforcing dikes, and sharing insights. A small child splashes through a shallow channel, scattering a few stray seedlings, and the adults laugh, correcting gently. These interactions, playful yet instructive, are part of the living education that preserves the knowledge of rare and resilient grains. As the day wanes, you pause by a particularly robust section of paddy, observing a cluster of unusual rice known for surviving both floods and droughts. Its stalks shimmer gold and green, bending only slightly with the water's current. Farmers whisper its name reverently, noting past seasons where it saved entire harvests from disaster. You feel the quiet reverence in their gestures, the subtle way in which human attention, environmental challenge, and seed resilience intersect. Quirky, ritualized, and profoundly practical, this cycle of flood and drought has shaped the story of Vietnamese rice varieties, embedding both adaptation and culture into the very grains beneath your fingertips. You step into the shadowed edges of a paddy, where mist curls lazily above the water and reeds sway with a whisper that seems almost sentient. Villagers move quietly among the stalks, their feet sinking softly into the mud, hands cupped around bundles of seedlings. Here, in these quiet margins, you encounter the spiritual dimension of rice. Certain varieties are believed to carry luck, memory, or omens. A stalk of golden rice may be left untouched for a week as an offering to appease the spirits of the field. You trudge softly along the muddy path, aware that in these moments, human and supernatural concerns are braided together, inseparable, like the roots of the rice itself. Historians still argue whether the rice spirits were metaphors for natural forces or genuinely conceived as sentient entities capable of blessing or cursing the harvest. Here, the rarest rice varieties reveal themselves not only in color and texture but in subtle movements. A delicate sway, a glint of gold in the early light, a slender panicle rising above the rest. You probably won't survive imagining the centuries of careful cultivation that brought this patch to life, but the thought fills you with a gentle awe, each stalk a testament to resilience, observation, and patience. Historians still debate whether the survival of these heirloom varieties relied primarily on environmental adaptation or cultural reverence, but as you kneel and touch the damp soil, you sense that human care was inseparable from ecological conditions. Quirky as it seems, some elders insist that these particular grains only thrive if a soft breeze passes through at dawn, as though nature itself participates in the ritual of growth. You watch a farmer adjusting seedlings with tender precision, whispering instructions in a cadence that blends practicality and poetry, a subtle choreography of survival. Nearby, women gather clusters of aromatic rice for steaming, each variety carefully separated to preserve its unique scent and texture. They work with fluid rhythm, fingers gliding over stalks, pressing, trimming, and bundling. Quirky as it seems, some sprinkle tiny flower petals into the water as they soak the grains, believing this enhances aroma and luck, a poetic gesture entwined with practice. Historians still argue whether such embellishments offered practical benefits or were primarily symbolic, but their persistence reflects a culture attuned to both sensory delight and subtle ritual. Children play along the banks, lightly scattering stray grains while learning through imitation. They observe differences in stalk strength, color, and panicle formation, internalizing centuries of tacit knowledge through touch and repetition. Quirky as it seems, some families whisper secrets to seedlings during planting, a gentle encouragement said to guide their growth. Historians still argue whether lunar influence or seasonal intuition was more effective in determining outcomes, but you sense that both were essential ingredients in this intricate dance. You drift toward a family cornered at the far edge of the field, a mother and daughter working silently in tandem. The daughter carefully counts seedlings, making sure each clump has precisely 3 stems, a number believed to harmonize growth and yield. The mother murmurs softly, sprinkling a fine dust of river silt over newly planted rows, claiming it balances nutrients and appeases spirits. You're struck by the intimate connection between human intention and the physical world, how every movement matters, and how superstition and observation intermingle without contradiction. It's like watching a ballet where every step carries centuries of accumulated knowledge. Nearby, small ritualistic offerings sit on bamboo trays. Tiny bundles of rice, incense, and even a pinch of salt. Villagers insist that the spirits of the fields will punish or reward depending on attention to these customs. You take a breath, inhaling the earthy aroma mingled with faint incense smoke, and realize that these ceremonies are not just quaint tradition. They are social glue, marking the passage of knowledge, the sharing of responsibility, and the reinforcement of hierarchy within the village. Some grains are literally consecrated, and in a sense, every kernel carries a lineage, a history, a blessing. As you wander further, a group of children giggle while mimicking the elders' movements, splashing water around with careful but unrefined rhythm. Their laughter is almost musical, blending with the rhythmic plop of seedlings dropped into soft mud. You notice a peculiar custom. On particularly auspicious nights, villagers will tap each seed 3 times before planting, a gesture said to wake the grain spirit. Either way, you feel the reverence that hums through every gesture. A bowed head, a sprinkle of water, a small whispered invocation. Quirky as it seems, some families believe that certain grains will sing if harvested improperly, producing a hushed rustle in the panicle that warns of misfortune. You strain to listen, half expecting the wind to carry a message, and can't help but smile at the delicate poetry embedded in everyday practice. You notice a family tending a cluster of red-stemmed rice, a rare variety reserved for ritual meals and ancestral offerings. The grandmother hums softly, tapping each stalk with a fingertip, murmuring its lineage and blessings. Children imitate her, lightly drumming stalks in the mud, learning to honor the unseen guardians while simultaneously learning how to handle the crop. The air is thick with incense, smoke curling upward from a small tray where grains are sprinkled alongside water and herbs. Quirky as it may seem, one local claim holds that the smoke attracts benevolent spirits who help the rice grow, a poetic gesture where observation and belief meet. Along the canal, small shrines are tucked among bamboo, their miniature roofs shaded by banana leaves. You watch as villagers place select grains upon them, sometimes only a handful, choosing kernels that are round, fragrant, or golden. You are struck by the intimate attention given to these offerings, the understanding that not all grains are equal in spiritual as well as practical terms. Historians still debate whether these ritualized selections influenced breeding choices over generations, effectively guiding which varieties survived or thrived, but the careful preservation of prized strains suggests a subtle but real effect. In a nearby paddy, you encounter a quirky practice. A farmer gently whispers advice to a handful of seedlings before planting, claiming that these words instruct the rice on its proper growth. Historians still debate whether these verbal rituals had tangible effects on yield or were mnemonic devices for careful handling. But either way, they demonstrate a profound intimacy between humans and rice. A small shrine tucked at the edge of a particularly rare patch draws your attention. Tiny offerings of rice, water, and herbs are arranged with meticulous care. Farmers explain that these rituals honor spirits believed to watch over the fields, ensuring protection and fertility. Quirky as it seems, some stalks are deliberately left untouched for days, a practice said to encourage longevity and abundance. Historians still argue whether these customs were functional, symbolic, or both, but the reverence they inspire clearly shapes attentive, patient care. As the morning deepens, irrigation channels hum softly, water flowing in carefully guided paths. Farmers adjust bamboo sluices, ensuring delicate varieties receive just the right depth. Some strains require constant monitoring, while others demonstrate remarkable resilience. Quirky as it seems, certain grains are thought to flourish when planted near specific herbs or companion varieties, blending observation, folklore, and ecological insight. Historians still debate whether these companion planting strategies were empirically recognized or culturally codified, yet the results speak to generations of attentive stewardship. By mid-morning, the delta radiates a quiet vitality. Stalks bend, water glimmers, and the air carries the mingled sense of wet earth and fragrant rice. You pause, taking in the convergence of labor, ritual, and ecological harmony. Each grain reflects history, care, and a subtle interplay of science and poetry. Quirky, meticulous, and profoundly human, these practices have preserved diversity, flavor, and cultural memory across generations. It seems whimsical, yet there is a precision and purpose behind each act, a delicate balancing act of belief and observation. Historians still debate whether such rituals genuinely affected germination or were a way of psychologically investing in a successful harvest. By the time the moon wanes toward dawn, the paddies shimmer with countless tiny green shoots, each one a testimony to care, timing, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. You pause to look at the horizon where mist hugs the water, the scent of mud and wet straw heavy in the air. You realize that lunar planting is more than a technique. It is a philosophy, a way of seeing life as interconnected, each movement in the field resonating with natural and spiritual worlds. You smile at the quiet poetry of it all, the way a simple kernel of rice can hold so much complexity, so much hope, so much whispered history. You drift toward the heart of the kingdom, where palaces rise above the river like solemn guardians of grain and glory. The scent of incense mingles with the earthy aroma of the delta, and you notice courtiers bustling with baskets of rice, their polished shoes clicking on wooden floors while servants carry ornate trays stacked with rare varieties. These are the prized grains, the ones whispered about in villages along the highlands. Rice with golden husks, fragrant like jasmine, and so sticky it forms perfect little clumps in the palm. You watch as they are presented to the mandarins and, ultimately, the emperor, a ritual that transforms food into power, prestige, and political capital. You probably won't survive imagining the delicacy of tasting one of these prized grains without feeling an odd pang of envy. Historians still argue whether these exotic varieties were selectively bred for taste or whether their rarity was deliberately maintained to underscore status. You bend close to watch, skeptical yet charmed, noting how the ritual blends with highly practical techniques. Seedlings are spaced meticulously, soil is checked for moisture, and dikes are adjusted for optimal flow. It's almost impossible to separate the pragmatic from the mystical. Both are embedded in the daily choreography of cultivation. You notice a cluster of particularly delicate glutinous rice, reserved for ceremonial cakes. Villagers handle it with care, sprinkling a pinch of ash over the young shoots as a protective measure. They explain that the ash honors the spirits and Dieter's pests, though you suspect it may also have minor fertilizing benefits, a curious overlap of ritual and practicality. Historians still argue whether the spiritual explanations for these protective techniques were symbolic, practical, or both, but the interplay of belief and observation is undeniable. Further along, children playfully scatter some of the grains, earning gentle admonishments from elders. The laughter rings out, blending with the soft buzz of insects and distant waterfowl. You realize that teaching reverence for rice is as much about embedding cultural memory as it is about ensuring survival. Each gesture, gentle tapping, whispered words, or careful planting, is a lesson passed from generation to generation, a subtle encoding of agricultural knowledge, social hierarchy, and spiritual understanding. By late afternoon, the paddies glow in the amber light of the sun, and the stalks sway gently as if acknowledging your presence. You pause to reflect on the many layers of interaction here. Human, environmental, and spiritual, intertwined seamlessly. Quirky and deeply practical, these beliefs have guided the selection, preservation, and care of rare rice varieties, ensuring their survival through centuries of floods, droughts, and social change. You breathe deeply, feeling the pulse of the delta in every stalk, aware that these grains carry not just sustenance but the whispers of centuries, resilience encoded in green and gold. You trudge along a winding canal, the late morning sun glinting off the water and casting shimmering reflections on the rice paddies. The air is rich with earthy humidity and the faint, sweet fragrance of flowering plants mingling with freshly harvested grains. Villagers move with quiet purpose, inspecting seedlings, adjusting water flow, and separating rare varieties from the bulk harvest. You probably won't survive imagining how many careful decisions, centuries of observation, and whispered instructions have shaped each patch, but the sense of continuity hums through the paddies, tangible beneath your fingertips. Each stalk, each grain, seems to carry a memory of generations, bending gently yet resiliently in the delta breeze. Historians still argue whether the extraordinary diversity of rice varieties in this region is the result of deliberate selection or mostly serendipity. Yet the landscape itself suggests careful management intertwined with observation and intuition. Quirky as it seems, some farmers whisper to seedlings, claiming that murmured words encourage upright growth and stronger panicles. A poetic gesture that merges belief, care, and tradition. You kneel to examine a slender, golden variety, noting how the roots grip the mud and how panicles catch the light. An intimate dance of environment, human attention, and inherited knowledge. Along the canal, children assist elders, learning to measure water depth, plant spacing, and the subtle differences between varieties. Some grains are reserved for ceremonial meals, others for daily sustenance, and a few for clandestine seed saving, hidden away from both floods and inquisitive traders. Either way, the spectacle is mesmerizing. Trays lined with rice of every shade, texture, and size, carried with ceremonial precision, almost as if the grains themselves are aware of their elevated status. You notice small labels written on bamboo tags, detailing origin, previous owners, and sometimes even the spiritual significance of each variety. A fascinating blend of botany, record-keeping, and courtly ritual. You smile at the thought of rice being as bureaucratic as the kingdom itself. Beyond the court's opulence, villagers maintain hidden reserves of seeds, secreted away in baskets or buried beneath floorboards. These heirloom varieties are whispered about in hushed tones, carefully preserved for reasons both practical and sentimental. A grandmother in a Delta village chuckles as she lifts a small bundle of long-forgotten rice, claiming it has the memory of storms and sunlight baked into it. You find yourself fascinated by the dichotomy. The same grain exalted in the palace for its beauty or flavor may be quietly nurtured by common families for survival, resilience, or ritual. Historians still debate whether these hidden varieties were consciously preserved as insurance against famine or as a cultural act of defiance against royal control. As you follow a narrow corridor to a secluded courtyard, you glimpse a ceremony where rare rice is offered to ancestral spirits. The golden grains glimmer in candlelight, and you notice the meticulous care with which each kernel is placed, almost reverently, as though the spirits themselves might taste them. You step closer and hear a soft chant, a rhythm that seems to synchronize with your heartbeat. Quirky as it seems, some accounts suggest that courtiers believed neglecting these offerings could provoke misfortune, everything from minor inconveniences to failed harvests in distant villages. The superstition blends seamlessly with courtly procedure, a curious mix of the mystical and the administrative. You breathe in the humid, earthy air and understand that every grain carries more than nutrients. It carries history, memory, and the soft whisper of ancestors still tending the fields alongside you. You trudge along a narrow dike, the air thick with humidity and the faint metallic scent of wet soil. The delta stretches endlessly around you, a mosaic of green and gold, and you notice how some paddies shimmer differently. Subtle variations hint at distinct varieties of rice. Farmers crouch in shallow water, carefully inspecting each stalk, their hands tracing the contours of the plants as if reading Braille. Each grain, they know, carries secrets of resilience, flavor, and history, encoded in its husk and root. You pause to admire a cluster of slender, pale green rice, whispering that this variety was once prized for festive desserts. You probably won't survive imagining how many hands and seasons shaped its delicate sweetness, but the thought is mesmerizing. Historians still argue whether the extraordinary diversity of Delta rice arose primarily from environmental pressures, selective breeding, or cultural preference, and watching these farmers, you realize it's probably all three, intertwined like the roots beneath your feet. Quirky as it seems, some villagers claim that certain grains prefer the company of others, thriving only when planted alongside compatible varieties, a notion that blurs the line between science, superstition, and poetic observation. You crouch beside a seedling, feeling the water lap over your fingers, and wonder how much of this knowledge is instinct, tradition, or a little bit of both. The irrigation channels hum quietly with flowing water, and you notice farmers adjusting tiny bamboo sluices to direct it toward specific plots. These movements are precise, almost ceremonial, as if each gesture ensures both survival and harmony. Some elders mutter that the spirits of the water approve or disapprove based on how carefully it is guided. Quirky as it seems, occasional sprinklings of ash or crushed petals are applied during transplanting, believed to protect against pests and invite favorable growth. Historians still debate whether these embellishments had measurable agronomic benefits or were symbolic acts reinforcing careful practice. But their persistence demonstrates a remarkable blend of ecology, culture, and attention to detail. You notice a cluster of particularly delicate glutinous rice, a strain prized for its stickiness in festive cakes. Villagers handle it with extreme care, pressing roots gently into the mud, trimming panicles, and monitoring for subtle signs of disease. Quirky as it seems, some families claim that rice grains respond to rhythmic pounding with better texture and flavor, a poetic ritual interwoven with practical food preparation. Historians still argue whether such tactile and auditory techniques influence grain quality or served mainly as mnemonic devices, but the continuity of the practice underscores its cultural significance. Nearby, a small shrine sits tucked between elevated plots, adorned with miniature offerings of rice, water, and aromatic leaves. Elders explain that these rituals honor the spirits of the fields, protecting the crops and guiding growth. Quirky as it seems, some rare varieties are intentionally left unharvested for days, believed to absorb spiritual energy and enhance resilience. Historians still debate whether these customs were primarily practical, symbolic, or a hybrid of both, but the meticulous care they engender ensures attentive stewardship and preservation of heirloom strains. By early afternoon, the paddies glow under the sun, the water reflecting the golden and green hues of flourishing rice. You drift along, observing elders and children alike, seeing how attention, ritual, and ecological knowledge converge seamlessly. Rare varieties are monitored for resilience, aroma, and yield. Common strains support daily meals. You wander past storage rooms where sacks of court rice sit beside ordinary stockpiles, the contrast striking. The prized varieties are lighter, sometimes perfumed with subtle scents, while the common rice is dense and earthy, functional but unremarkable. You watch an attendant carefully separate grains, sorting by length, texture, and sheen. This attention to detail fascinates you, as it mirrors the social hierarchies outside the grain itself. Even the rice participates in power dynamics, reinforcing distinctions between those who eat and those who serve. Historians still argue whether the meticulous care of these grains was symbolic status theater or practical management of sensitive crops prone to spoilage. Outside the palace, villagers work quietly, transplanting their secret stocks into carefully tended paddies. They whisper to one another, sharing tips on soil, water levels, and germination, often in coded language that keeps the varieties safe from prying eyes. You notice one particularly curious practice. Some farmers mark their rare seeds with tiny knots in straw or colored threads, almost like a secret password for the next generation. It is whimsical, almost detective-like, yet it preserves knowledge and continuity in a world of uncertainty. You can't help but admire the cleverness, the way survival, ritual, and a little mischief intertwine. The contrast between palace and paddies is striking. In the court, rice is a display, a measure of taste and refinement. In the villages, it is survival, identity, and quiet rebellion. You wander along a raised causeway, watching children imitate planting techniques in miniature fields, perhaps unaware that the same grains could end up in an imperial banquet someday. Some grains are reserved for festivals, others for daily sustenance, and a few for secret medicinal uses. You watch as a child helps an elder redistribute a few seedlings, learning how to place them so roots will grip and stalks will sway gently without breaking. Quirky practices abound, sprinkling ash over young plants, singing softly during transplanting, and marking prized kernels with tiny threads to ensure they aren't confused with the ordinary stock. Historians still debate whether such practices affected yields or were symbolic, but the delicate care invested in each plot seems undeniably purposeful. You notice a family tending to an unusual reddish-brown strain, apparently forgotten by most but treasured for resilience in flooded fields. The mother hums softly, pressing seedlings into mud with gentle precision, while her daughter imitates her gestures. You can feel the patience embedded in every movement, the slow rhythm of planting, the intuitive spacing, the careful eye for damage. These gestures are history encoded in action, each plant nurtured with hands that have learned subtle cues over decades. Quirky as it seems, some families whisper that the rice will remember the care it received, producing better grains if planted with reverence. A poetic, almost magical notion that reflects deep respect for life. Along the path, you pass a small shrine nestled between two paddies, tiny offerings of rice and water placed delicately on banana leaves. Villagers explain that these offerings honor field spirits who oversee growth and protect the crop from misfortune. You pause, the soft fragrance of incense blending with the humid air, and realize that spirituality and agriculture are inseparable here. Historians still argue whether these rituals primarily guided social cohesion, motivated careful farming, or genuinely reflected belief in supernatural intervention, but their persistence shows a careful blending of observation, ritual, and care. Nearby, children play while helping their parents, scattering stray grains, laughing as the water splashes their ankles. Quirky, poetic, and profoundly practical, the management of these paddies reflects a deep human understanding of ecology, patience, and the rhythms of the delta. You breathe in the humid, fragrant air, feeling the pulse of centuries encoded in every stalk, knowing that these grains carry not just sustenance, but the enduring memory of those who tended them before. You trudge along the final stretch of the delta, where the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the paddies. The air is a tapestry of scents: wet mud, ripening rice, and faint floral notes from surrounding plants. Water glimmers like liquid gold in the late afternoon, reflecting the sky and the gentle sway of stalks. Farmers move quietly among the plots, checking for pests, adjusting irrigation, and whispering soft encouragements to seedlings. You probably won't survive imagining the patience, intuition, and knowledge embedded in every gesture. But as you follow their rhythm, the depth of human care becomes almost tangible. Each grain is not merely sustenance. It's a vessel of memory, culture, and survival. Historians still argue whether the extraordinary diversity of 18th century Vietnamese rice reflects deliberate selective breeding, environmental adaptation, or a combination of both. Yet standing here, you can see the tangible results of centuries of attentive stewardship. Quirky as it seems, some families insist that certain varieties must hear the laughter of children to grow well, a charming belief that intertwines observation, folklore, and practical care. You watch a child carefully move seedlings into their designated row, her hands tracing the subtle differences in stalk height and leaf color, unknowingly participating in the preservation of rare and resilient grains. Nearby, a family prepares a harvest of delicate glutinous rice for ceremonial cakes. Quirky rumors persist. One variety, known as moon whisper rice, is said to bloom more fragrant under a full moon, while another supposedly protects children from spirits if consumed on certain days. Historians still debate whether these attributions are folk exaggeration or based on subtle differences in cultivar performance. Later, you glimpse a hidden courtyard where elderly villagers meet, exchanging seeds that are too precious to be revealed publicly. The air is thick with stories of past floods, pestilence, and famine, and how these heirlooms survived through careful stewardship and secrecy. One farmer, pressing a handful of seeds into your palm, whispers a sort of promise. Take care of them, and they will remember you. You feel the weight of generations of climate and culture resting in something so small. Even now, centuries later, these grains embody the ingenuity and subtle defiance of ordinary people preserving knowledge under the shadow of imperial authority. By the afternoon, the palace gleams in the sun, but the quiet paddies beyond carry the pulse of daily life. You notice how ritual, secrecy, and taste converge in each grain. An ordinary seed can be extraordinary depending on context, intent, and care. And as you watch a family gently wash and sort their hidden stock, you appreciate the delicate balance between reverence and practicality, performance and preservation, spectacle, and survival. In the end, these rice varieties are more than food. They are legacy, memory, and identity, traveling between palaces and paddies, visible and hidden, ordinary and exalted, waiting to be sown, preserved, and remembered. You wander into a village where the kitchens smell of firewood, freshly harvested herbs, and the faint tang of fermented fish, a scent that lingers in the nostrils like a stubborn memory. Here, rice is not just sustenance, it is flavor, texture, and identity. You notice a peculiar method. After scattering, a pinch of earth or ash is sprinkled over the seedlings, an old technique believed to strengthen them and deter pests. Quirky as it may seem, it's also effective. The combination of observation, superstition, and tactile care ensures the rice thrives. You watch as the sun reflects off the water, casting a golden glow on stalks standing straight and resilient, each one a testament to centuries of meticulous human stewardship. By late afternoon, the paddies are alive with movement. Farmers trimming dikes, adjusting water flow, and checking each cluster of seedlings. The air hums softly with the sound of insects, water flowing, and distant chatter. You feel a profound sense of connection to both the land and its history, realizing that each stalk of rice is more than food. It is memory, culture, and survival encoded in green and gold. Quirky, poetic, practical, and ritualized, the Delta's diversity of rice varieties continues to thrive under hands attuned to its rhythms, echoing lessons learned through generations of observation, adaptation, and reverence. You trudge into a quieter corner of the Delta, where the sun warms the muddy banks and a gentle breeze carries the scent of wet rice and distant forest. Here, the paddies are smaller, terraced carefully to hold water in a precise rhythm. You notice the subtle differences in plant height, color, and panicle shape. Some are tall and airy, bending gracefully under the afternoon light, while others are compact and sturdy, almost stubborn in their resistance to wind or flood. These differences are not accidental. They are the fingerprints of centuries of careful cultivation, observation, and selection by hands that understand soil, water, and seed as intimately as an artist knows paint and canvas. You probably won't survive realizing how much patient labor and quiet knowledge went into each stalk, but the beauty of it humbles you. They soak, pound, and steam with a rhythm passed down over generations, their fingers moving with intimate knowledge of the grain. Quirky as it seems, a soft chant accompanies the pounding, believed to coax the rice into absorbing care and energy. Historians still debate whether these chants had practical effects on texture or were mnemonic devices ensuring consistent technique, but their persistence underscores the intertwined nature of ritual and labor. Along a quiet irrigation channel, you notice tiny bamboo tubes holding secret seeds, carefully hidden from floods and opportunistic traders. Elders explain that these micro-reserves preserve rare varieties, ensuring that lineage and memory survive the vagaries of nature and human curiosity. Quirky as it seems, some grains are marked with subtle color threads or tied with straw, a system of preservation that blends symbolism, practicality, and cultural knowledge. Historians still argue whether such methods significantly impacted survival rates, but observing the care devoted to these seeds demonstrates a profound commitment to continuity. As twilight approaches, the Delta becomes a living mosaic. Resilient and delicate varieties intermixed, water reflecting the sky, and villagers moving like shadows across the paddies. Every action, planting, tending, whispering, marking, or harvesting, is layered with intention and meaning, ensuring both survival and cultural continuity. Quirky, meticulous, and deeply human, these practices have preserved a remarkable diversity of rice varieties, embedding knowledge, flavor, and memory across generations. By nightfall, you pause at the water's edge, breathing in the humid, fragrant air. The paddies shimmer softly in the fading light, stalks swaying with a rhythm older than most human memory. You feel the pulse of centuries in each movement, the continuity of labor and ritual, and the resilience of life encoded in green and gold. You trudge along the narrow earthen paths between houses, observing women winnowing rice over low baskets, dust motes dancing in the slanting light like tiny stars, while children chase each other, squealing, their feet slapping against the damp mud. You notice the extraordinary diversity of grains. Some short and sticky, perfect for dumplings. Others long, airy, and fragrant, prized for steaming. A few almost translucent, reserved for special desserts or communal offerings. It's a living pantry of history, each kernel holding the essence of a vanished variety and the hands that nurtured it. Historians still argue whether regional culinary differences drove the selection of these heirloom varieties, or if environmental factors dictated the flavor and texture profiles. But as you taste a freshly steamed clump of local rice, you realize that human choice and ecology are inseparable. The village elder, a woman whose fingers are stained from handling turmeric and mud, leans over the basket and murmurs that this particular strain was once queen of the paddies. Now almost forgotten, prized for aroma and resilience. You marvel at the devotion, the care, and the subtle pride woven into daily preparation. Quirky as it seems, some families even sprinkle a pinch of powdered flower petals into the rice before cooking, believing it enhances taste and ward off spirits of misfortune. An almost poetic flourish that blurs gastronomy and ritual. Quirky, practical, poetic, and profoundly enduring. The Delta's rice varieties are not merely crops. They are living history, quietly telling stories of adaptation, reverence, and care that transcend time. Now, you slow your pace, letting the soft chorus of water, wind, and distant insects wash over you. The Delta seems to breathe gently, and you imagine each rice stalk, golden or green, swaying in a rhythm that matches your own slowing heartbeat. The sun has fully set, leaving a warm amber glow across the water, and the hum of life continues, persistent yet calming. You trudge no more, simply observing, allowing the quiet pulse of generations to settle softly into your awareness. You probably won't survive contemplating how much patience and care were invested into every grain, but letting yourself rest in that knowledge is comforting, almost like a lullaby whispered by the land itself. The fragrant air, heavy with wet earth and ripening rice, drifts into your senses, and you let your thoughts follow the gentle sway of stalks, the soft ripple of water, and the faint rustle of leaves. You remember the meticulous hands, the whispered encouragements, and the tiny rituals that ensured survival. Quirky stories of singing grains, moonlight blessings, and secret seed tubes mingle with the hum of insects and frogs, creating a soft symphony of memory and care. You breathe slowly, letting the layered history of the Delta unfold like a gentle, endless story around you. As darkness deepens, your mind eases, absorbing the rhythm of labor, reverence, and resilience. Every grain of rice seems to carry the pulse of time, the dedication of countless hands, and the whispers of ancestors who nurtured life and memory together. The Delta becomes a cocoon of sound, scent, and subtle movement, carrying you along its quiet currents. Let yourself drift with it, knowing that these stories, like the rice itself, endure, resilient, patient, and quietly nourishing. You feel a soft, lingering calm, a sense of continuity and connection that wraps around you like a warm blanket, easing every tension.